Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to lesson 8. We're going to start talking about verbs. We've talked about a lot of different grammatical concepts, but we haven't really touched verbs yet. So today we'll start by talking about past tense verbs. In Arabic, there are really only two tenses, past tense and then present slash future tense. In today's lesson, we're going to just focus on past tense. So verbs like kataba, which means he wrote, so he already completed the action, past tense. We're going to cover present and future tense in a future lesson, inshallah. So let's actually start off by talking about the order of words in a sentence. In English, typically when you write a sentence, the first thing that you write in the sentence is the subject. The subject comes first, then the verb, then the object, if there is an object, and finally you can add adverbs usually at the end of a sentence. So let's take a look at an example. Mustafa wrote the book today. Mustafa wrote the book today. The subject here is Mustafa, then the verb comes, and then you have the object, and then you have the adverb. Now in Arabic, you can do it that same order. You can actually start off with the subject, then do the verb, then the object, and the adverb. But the most common ordering is actually to put the verb first. Okay, so to say something like, wrote Mustafa the book today. Or in Arabic, Kataba Mustafa al-kitaba al-yawma. Kataba is the verb, it means he wrote. Mustafa is of course Mustafa. Al-kitaba is the book, and al-yawm is today. So you'll notice that the verb appears first. And there are a few important rules here that we should cover about verbs, and specifically the past tense verbs. The vast majority of verbs in Arabic are triliteral. What that means is that they have 3 letters in their root. So let's take kataba as an example. The 3 root letters are kaf, ta, and ba. And all other words that are derived from this verb include those 3 root letters. And then you can add suffixes and prefixes and that kind of thing. So kataba is kataba. Now if I wanted to say he is writing or he writes, so present tense, I say yaktubu. And you'll notice I added a ya at the beginning, but the ka ta ba is still there. The kaf ta ba is still there. Similarly, if I wanted to say book, it's kitab, kaf ta ba. If I want to say the act of writing, katibun, is kaf ta ba again. If I want to say author, katibun, again I see a kaf, then an alif, then a ta and a ba. So the idea here is that you have all of these other words that are derived from this verb that share these 3 letters. And that's really powerful because that means by learning one verb, I can actually learn 20 to 30 other words or even more that are all derived from this word. And that's very different. Consider the case in English. You have book, you have author, you have write. These don't even sound like similar words, but in Arabic they do. We're also going to start off just by discussing regular verbs in Arabic. And what I mean by that is that they don't have a ya, a hamza, or a waw as one of their root letters. So none of these 3 root letters are waw, ya, or hamza. Because if you do have one of these letters as one of your roots, it kind of changes some of the conjugation. We'll get to that in a future lesson. Also, the second and third root letters should be different. Okay, so you cannot repeat the same root letter. If you have a regular verb, then you can start conjugating that. And what I mean by conjugating is that the past tense verb, its ending changes based on the gender, based on the person, and the number of people that are doing that verb. So what we've seen already is that if I want to say Mustafa wrote, I say kataba Mustafa. But let's say I'm talking about a woman who wrote. Let's say Noura wrote. In that case, I say katabat Noura al-kitaba al-yawma. You'll notice that the word, the verb itself has changed. It's not just that the subject has changed, the verb itself has changed. So now it's katabat, the ta ending, the suffix. And so, depending on who is committing the action, you add a different suffix. So the base case, the starting case is when it's a singular masculine person who's committing the action, and you're talking about him in the third person. He wrote. That's kataba. If it's many men that are writing, then you say katabu. If it's one woman that is writing, she wrote, katabat. If it's many women that are writing, they wrote, katabna. If you're speaking directly to the person, you wrote, katabta. If you're speaking to a group of men, katabtum. Speaking to a woman, katabti. Multiple women, katabtunna. If you're talking about yourself, I wrote, katabtu. If you're talking about a group of us, we wrote, katabna. So this is another table that you should memorize, and you'll notice certain patterns, certain commonalities with the previous tables that we've covered. For example, the second person looks a little bit like the pronoun suffixes that we saw, but instead of ka, kum, we have ta, tum, ti, tunna, and so on. So just go through and memorize this. We will also learn more verbs throughout this lesson, and so you can start applying the same rule to these other verbs as well. So for example, let's say the verb is qara'a, which means to read. You can go ahead and apply that here as well. So qara'a, qara'u, qara'at, qara'na, and so on. Right? Another verb is, let's say, nasara, to help. So you have nasara, nasaru, nasarat, nasaruna, nasarta, nasartum, nasarti, nasartunna, nasartu, nasarana. So you basically just take that verb and you fit it into this pattern, right? So you fit it into this table and you apply the appropriate suffixes to create each of these different meanings. Okay, so one thing that I will mention is that some verbs, instead of having a fatha on the second letter, they'll have a kasra, or very rarely a dhamma instead. So an example of one of these verbs is hasiba. So hasiba has a kasra on the second letter, but otherwise it follows the exact same pattern here. So hasiba, hasibu, hasibat. And then very rarely you have some verbs that have a dhamma, karuma, karuma, karumu, karumat, karumna. So as you encounter these verbs, you can fit them into this table so you really have this completely memorized. Okay, so this table is very important. Make sure you commit it to memory. Okay, so there is one more set of rules that's very important to cover, which is that depending on the ordering, you might not need to do all of these rules. So if the verb appears before the subject, it actually turns out that the verb will always take the singular form. So it'll always come from this column, even if the subject is plural. So here's an example of that. Kataba al-Muslimun al-Kitaba al-Yawma. The Muslims wrote the book today. Now in this case, the subject is plural, but the verb will still be singular. However, it has to agree with the subject in the gender. So if you were to say the Muslim women wrote the book today, how would you say that? You would say Katabat al-Muslimatu al-Kitaba al-Yawma. Okay? Katabat al-Muslimatu al-Kitaba al-Yawma. So if the verb appears before the subject, it's singular but has to agree in the gender. However, if the verb appears after the subject, we said this can also happen, just like it can happen in English, but it's rarer, then the verb agrees with the subject in the gender and the singular or pluralness. So al-Muslimuna katabu, we have to use the plural form. They wrote the book today. And finally, the last rule that we have to cover about verbs is that we have to talk about the cases of the nouns in a verbal sentence. So if your sentence has a verb in it, then there may also be a bunch of nouns. What cases do they take? Well, this should mostly be a review. The subject is in the marfu'a case. So kataba al-muslimuna. And by the way, this is true if the subject appears before or after. Kataba al-muslimuna. And then the object of the sentence and any other adverbs or any other nouns that appear, they happen to be in the mansub case. So you don't say al-kitabu, you say al-kitaba, because kitab is not the subject. Similarly, you don't say al-yawmu, you say al-yawma, because it's acting like an adverb here. It's describing how the verb was conducted, or when it was conducted, or where it was conducted. Alright, let's take a look at a few examples that will really allow us to understand all of the rules we've covered so far. The first one here is Balagha Maghrib al-Shamsi. This is from Surah Al-Kahf. He reached the place where the sun sets. So how is it he reached? How do we know that this is saying he reached? The word for he in Arabic is huwa. There's no huwa here. But just the verb alone can tell you that the subject is he. How? Because we're using the third person singular masculine form. We're not saying balagat, that would mean she reached. Balagha, it must be referring to a he. And if that he hasn't been mentioned in the sentence yet, that's okay. This is enough to tell you that it means he reached. He reached. So balagha means he reached. Maghrib al-shamsi, this is actually a possession construction. So that's why ash-shamsi is in the majroor case, the setting place of the sun. And maghriba here is in mansub case because this is kind of an adverb of balagha. It's saying where did he reach? Or this is kind of the object rather. So it's saying that he reached at the setting place. And so this is in the mansub case. And then this here is in majroor because it's the thing that possesses. Alright. سمعتم آيات الله. سمعتم. سمع means to hear. سمعتم means you heard. You heard. This is, I'm talking to a group of men. سمعتم آيات الله. So this here is the object, ayat. You heard the signs. You heard the verses. And again, we have a possession construction. These are so common throughout the Quran and in all of the Arabic language. سمعتم آيات الله. You heard the signs of Allah. So this is in what case? This is in mansub case. Which case is this in? This is in, the word Allah is in the majroor case because it is the possessor. عملوا الصالحات. عملوا الصالحات. They did. So عمل means to do something, to act on something. So عملوا, they did. الصالحات again is in the mansub case. It means righteous deeds. And this, both of these by the way, what kind of plurals are they? This is the sound feminine plural. And that's why the mansub case ends with the T ending. Finally, one last example. This one's a little bit interesting. We won't go into too much depth here. But katabnaha. Katabnaha means we wrote it. And the way to break this down is, let's start with just that first part here. Katabna. Katabna is first person plural. That means we wrote it. We wrote. We wrote. Katabna. And then remember, you can add a suffix, a pronoun suffix. If the object is a pronoun, you add it as a suffix because it's in the mansub case. So here, ha is her, but in this case, it means it because it's just referring to a feminine object. It's referring to a feminine object. It could mean, it could be anything. It could be some sort of, magazine or something. So there are many words in Arabic that are feminine. Maybe it's referring to one of those words. And so we wrote it. The word for it here, the pronoun suffix is ha. Katabnaha. Okay. Now I know there's a lot going on, and it's okay if you don't remember all of the rules. The most important thing to do is to memorize this table. Memorize this table, commit it to heart, and then we will end with a few exercises that will again kind of reinforce some of those lessons. The first one here is dakhala al-madinata. The word dakhala means to enter. Al-Madina is the city. So what does this sentence mean here? Dakhala al-Madina. So you'll notice that this is in the singular masculine form. So he entered the city. What about dakhalu qaryatan? Qaryatan is like a settlement, for example. So dakhalu is the same word, but now it's they entered. It's plural. Dakhalu qaryatan. Dakhalu qaryatan. They entered the settlement. Ba'atha means to raise, like as in to raise from the dead, or in this case, let's try to understand the meaning here. Ba'atha Allahu rasulan. Ba'atha Allahu rasulan. Allah raised a messenger. Allah raised a messenger. How do we know Allah, the word Allah, is the subject of this sentence? Because of the marfu' ending here, the dhamma here. Ba'atha Allahu rasulan. We see rasulan is in the mansub. case. It's the object here. Just like these words were the object in the previous sentences. Allah raised a messenger. So meaning that Allah caused a messenger to appear within a group of people. One more exercise here. خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ. We created the human being. We created the human being. Khalaqa means to create. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about himself in the royal we sense. So we created the human being. And that is in the mansub case. It's the object. So we will end here. I have a few more examples for you to try on your own. These are some more examples. I'll just quickly mention. Dhakara means to mention. Wajada means to find. Qawm means a people. You know that already. Imra'atan means a woman. So using that, you should be able to translate all of these sentences and understand what they mean grammatically. Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much for listening. It's been a pleasure. I will see you next time, inshallah, in lesson 9. Assalamu alaikum.